I spoke here at Morningstar at an ecumenical service we had. It was multi-denominational, right around the time of our second inauguration. And I talked about the fact that in this job, I meet a lot of people who are going through really tough and difficult times and circumstances, and I was always comforted by how many of them found their faith to be a big part of how they persevered and worked their way through it. And honestly, it troubles me that at a point in time when so many people are appropriately concerned and worried about the present and the future and all the issues associated with COVID-19, we can't really give them the chance to come sit shoulder to shoulder as they normally would on a Friday or a Saturday or Sunday with people they've been sitting shoulder to shoulder with for years, to find that sense of hope and security and comfort that comes with being part of a community like this. And I spoke at Temple Emmanuel to an empty temple on Friday night at a Shabbat Shalom ceremony, and I spoke here today. These were both prearranged. They were part of my regular schedule, but I really wanted to keep them because I know how important this is to people, especially at times like this. We had, FEMA and the Army Corps, for all intents and purposes, are hand in glove on this stuff. And we had a long conference call yesterday with the Guard, with FEMA, the Army Corps, folks from the command center, and other folks in our administration, and Mayor Walsh and his chief of staff, Catherine Burton, and Brian Golden, who is the mayor's head of the BPDA, all to talk about sort of what the Corps' capabilities were, how their process worked, and how, if we were interested in pursuing that option, which we are, we would go about engaging with them. And I fully expect that over the course of the next few days, we will be offering up a variety of sites to both FEMA and to the Corps, and saying to them, help us understand if these sites are consistent with what your capabilities are and how they would work in a process to try to create additional capacity to deal not just with COVID-19, but in some cases to make capacity available to deal with other issues that people are dealing with, because people will be dealing with COVID-19 cases. It depends upon the nature of the facility. If you're talking about a nursing home that was open until fairly recently is closed, that's a much different issue than if you're talking about actually trying to construct something from scratch. But these guys said they can put those field hospitals up once sort of the details are determined and the contractors are in place, and the feds and FEMA have lots of those folks in place to begin with. I mean, they can put that stuff up in 2 or 3 weeks.
In terms of how much capacity, I guess, that would add to what we currently have, any feel for how many of these makeshift hospitals?
Well, keep in mind, they're not, if you're using existing facilities and just repurposing them, that's different than if you're trying to set something up literally that's kind of a stand-up from scratch. But between dormitories and hotels and decommissioned hospital beds and nursing homes, I mean, we have a lot of different kinds of capacity that can be brought up relatively quickly. And one of the things the command center is working on with the folks in the healthcare community is what the actual requirement would look like, where it would need to be in terms of the Commonwealth generally, and what kind of capacity it would be. In some cases, you're talking about post-acute care, and in some cases, you're talking about other kinds of support.
Governor, would that allow for more widespread testing or more on-demand testing of people who are less sick?
Well, the feds opened up the testing aperture about 10 days ago, and we've increased our daily testing by almost 75% since then. I fully expect, I said this for a while, that the goal here is to dramatically expand testing, daily testing in Massachusetts, both in terms of who gets tested and how many people get tested, and to then use that data to do tracing and isolation. That has been the strategy that has been most effective in other countries. And it's got to be a core of the way we deal with this. Well, the first thing I'd say about the case in Nantucket is we have talked to people on both Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard who say that a lot of people who have second homes there have been going there. We would prefer they not do that, and that they stay on the mainland and don't create additional issues for both of those islands at a point in time when they don't have the same level of service capacity in place they would typically have in the summer. We continue to work on the strategies that we have with respect to social distancing and work, and we're going to continue to adjust those as we see fit.
Last question.
Say again? Yeah, we have literally daily discussions, conversations, and dialogue with the State Department and with members of our congressional delegation, and in some cases, conversations directly with people who are working their way back here. And our goal is to make sure we get all those people back as safely and as quickly as we possibly can. But those are constant conversations.
Yesterday we saw the case of
Say again?
Yesterday we saw the case of 37% big come out at the same pace. As we're nearing a 50% what are the seeing, saying about the trajectory here in Massachusetts?
Well, keep in mind the testing went up almost 50% the past 2 days as well, each day. And I fully expect the testing is going to go up in leaps and bounds based on the changes in the federal standards and the availability of additional test capacity here in Massachusetts. And I've said now for 5 or 6 days that as we test more, we are going to find more people who are infected. And that's then going to lead to a lot more aggressive approaches to deal with tracing and isolation. But I think one of the key elements of success in dealing with this is amping up dramatically our testing capability so that we can identify people who are infected, so that we can then create isolation processes for them and for those they've come in contact with. That number is going to climb, and the reason that number is going to climb is because we're testing more. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And by the way, people are recovering at the same time that new people are coming on. So there's two numbers you got to pay attention to. One number is the number of new tests that come up positive. The second number is how many tests are actually being delivered. And the third number is how many people are recovering. And the fourth number is how many people are being hospitalized. And then the worst one of all, of course, is the number associated with those who have passed away. And we actually had our second person pass away as a woman in her 50s who had pre-existing conditions that would have made her vulnerable to this in the first place.
When do you expect Boston to open to people who may not be
Well, the testing guidelines we and everybody else are using are the CDC guidelines, which literally have 6 or 7 categories, and they're not ands, they're ors. If you have one of the following things, then you qualify for testing. Say again? Well, we treat the first responder community as a Category 1, and they get tested they get tested 2 different ways. One is they are exposed to somebody who in fact is tested positive themselves. We test them and anybody else that they've been around. And then the second is if they develop symptoms, we test them and then do the same work associated with isolating them and whomever else they've been in close contact with. But they're a Category 1 play.
Will there be personal protective equipment issued to them by the state?
We and everybody else across the country are chasing PPE as hard as we possibly can. And we have orders out all over the country and frankly all over the world. And I am hoping and anticipating that the President's going to live up to the commitment that he made to me after I raised this issue with him earlier in the week, where I said, you can't bid against us if you expect us to go out and buy this stuff. And And he said the next day that if they're in a bid war with states and other entities, that they'll step back.
Thanks, guys.
Is the state issuing any guidance to gas stations or anything like that where you know surface content or just able to get a pump or something like that?
The biggest thing I would say there is the same thing we've said since the beginning of this, which is personal hygiene is the most important part of all. You know, hand sanitizer, wash your hands, hand sanitizer, literally all the time, constantly doing that, because that is going to be, in many respects, one of the most important ways you can deal with something which is a contact-based transmission. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.